The Watchtower has long argued that none of those mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11 have gone, nor will ever, go to heaven. In fact, their position on this is very precise. In their publication, You Can Live Forever on Paradise Earth, they state that those in Hebrews chapter 11, they did not hope to go to heaven, but hope to live again on earth. However, my dispute is not so much with the eternal dwelling place of those mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11, but with a particular event surrounding the person of Enoch. So here I'd like to present an exercise in objective thinking. That is, forget about your preconceived theological notions and just go with what the Bible is explicitly stating. So here I'd like to contrast two things. The first is what the Watchtower is saying, and second, what the Bible is saying. And it may be your position, even at the end of this exercise, that the Watchtower's interpretation fits right in with the biblical explanation. But I'd like for you to just consider this question. Are you allowing the text of Scripture to speak on its own terms, or are you importing a preconceived theological idea into the text of Scripture? And with that said, I'd like to discuss the person of Enoch. And there's two places in the Bible which mention Enoch that I'd like to discuss, and that is Genesis 5:24 and Hebrews 11:5. In the New World Translation in Genesis 5:24 it says, "And Enoch kept walking with the true God. Then he was no more, for God took him." Well, it would be difficult at this point to establish what exactly happened to Enoch. It could be that God ended his life just as easily as it could be that he took him away into heaven. But when we turn to Hebrews 11:5, we find that more details are presented in which we can know what happened to Enoch. It states in Hebrews 11:5 that by faith Enoch was transferred so as not to see death, and he was nowhere to be found because God had transferred him. For before his transference he had the witness that he had pleased God well. Now, forgetting about your preconceived theological notions, what is the simplest and clearest reading of this text? First, it would seem obvious that we can rule out death. The reason being, the text says that Enoch did not see death. And typically, when we speak of someone not seeing death, we are speaking of someone who did not die. But second, we have even more of a confirmation that Enoch did not die, for he was nowhere to be found. If Enoch had died, could anyone say that Enoch was nowhere to be found? And third, the fact that God transferred him should rule out any possibility that this could have been some sort of change in Enoch's mental state. For if Enoch was nowhere to be found because God had transferred him, this must mean that Enoch was physically taken away. Now, if this reading of the text is correct, then we are left with what seems to be only one option. That is, Enoch was taken into heaven. And though the text doesn't explicitly state that heaven was where he was taken to, this seems to be the most reasonable option, since Genesis 5:24 says that he was no more. Therefore, if someone is no more because they were transferred, then heaven seems to be the most likely option. But one thing is for certain: death is not an interpretive option, for the text explicitly rules this out. Next and last, I'd like to share with you the Watchtower's interpretation of the text. And because I'm not going to offer any criticisms of their position from this point forward, I'd like for you to think very carefully and objectively about what they say. That is, think about what the scriptures are saying and which view, whether it's mine or the Watchtower's, is reading their theology into the text of Scripture and making it fit with their own theological ideas, and which view is allowing the text of Scripture to speak on its own terms. Here's the Watchtower interpretation. Enoch was apparently in mortal danger when God took him. Jehovah did not allow his faithful prophet to suffer at the hands of rabid enemies. According to the Apostle Paul, Enoch was transferred so as to not see death. Many say that Enoch did not die, that God took him to heaven, where he kept on living. However, Jesus plainly stated, "No man has ascended into heaven, but he that descended from heaven, the Son of Man." Jesus was the forerunner of all who ascend to heaven. So what happened to Enoch? His being transferred so as not to see death may mean that God put him in a prophetic trance and then terminated his life while he was in that state. Under such circumstances, Enoch would not experience the pangs of death. Then he was nowhere to be found, apparently because Jehovah disposed of his body even as he disposed of Moses' body.